Good morning, everyone. My name is Robert Pesich, co-producer for Beautiful Black Books, presented by Poetry Center San Jose, with host Santa Clara County Poet Laureate Emeritus Tshaka Campbell, and featuring Carmen Kennedy. And so BBB is a recurring program featuring Black writers in conversation, followed by a Q&A. It is a vessel of exchange as we bring Black writers to our communities and our communities to these writers to learn about their sources of inspiration. We begin today's program with the following land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that Poetry Center San Jose and the city of San Jose exist on the unceded land of the Muwekma Ohlone. We recognize that the Muwekma Ohlone people are alive and flourishing members of the community today and recognize their right to this land, which they have stewarded throughout generations. We acknowledge that members of the San Jose community and residents of California and the United States continue to benefit from the use and occupation of indigenous land. And we acknowledge that this land has come under the control of various entities through violence and dishonesty. And we recognize the history and legacy of colonialism that continue to negatively impact indigenous peoples, their traditional territories, practices, sovereignty, languages, life, ways, and well-being to this day. Donate to the Bay Area-based Sogoreate Land Trust, led by Urban Indigenous Women. We will share a link to that and other information in the chat. Now for a moment of silence. Thank you. Poetry Center San Jose, member-supported organization, funded in part by grants from Applied Materials Foundation, the City of San Jose's Office of Cultural Affairs, Literary Arts Emergency Fund, supported by the Mellon Foundation, Knight Foundation, Poets and Writers, Silicon Valley Community Foundation, SV Creates, in partnership with the County of Santa Clara and the California Arts Council, and also supported in part by a SV Creates National Endowment for the Arts American Rescue Plan grant. We also thank Brandenburg Family Foundation and Ann and Mark's Art Party for their generous giving. To support this program, just visit pcsj.org/membership. Now, to introduce your host, who will introduce our guest, Carmen Estela Kennedy Saleh, Santa Clara County Poet Laureate Emeritus Tshaka Campbell has authored 4 books of poetry and is an internationally recognized artist and performer. He has won Grand Slam championships in a number of cities across the U.S. His project, In Our Words, is an anthology of youth poetry and visual art from Santa Clara County youth and was part of a larger program called Bringing the Light. He will publish, wait for it, his next poetry collection, Blood at the Root, with El Martillo Press. He currently resides in San Jose and continues to ask the world to listen different. Now, please welcome Tshaka Campbell.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and for all the land acknowledgements, and mention our sponsors who, without them, we would not be here. We'd find a way, but we would not be here today. I am so excited to be with everyone today. As Rob mentioned earlier, the BBB is really an opportunity for us to bring Black writers to our communities, to having these platforms. I would always liken it to you see these folks in their daily lives, whether it be performance or the work that they do in our community. You don't really get a chance to pull them up and really just talk to them about what they do or why they do it and things of that sort. So this is I'm really blessed to have this platform to have these conversations and to let folks listen in on these conversations because I'm super selfish in this place, and just I love being able to do that. So secretly, it's a selfish joy, but we're sharing. So our guest today, I'm gonna read a bio, but let me just say, and as you can already see, there's only a couple people in the world that I think, when you walk into a room, their smile, just everything that was bad in the day melts away and everything good begins to start flowing across your body. And this individual. Um, the energy is just when you're in person, if you're lucky enough to be in the same space as this person, her halo, her energy fills the entire room. Anyway, I'm not gonna make her blush anymore, but Carmen Kennedy is a writer, is a perennial learner. So you can find her rooted in discussions with bright students as easily as you can find her planted behind a good book. In fact, she says she sees her name on a few of these and therefore sown some seeds of her work in Themis and Acacia journals, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. If not, apologies. Respectively, proudly reaped a James D. Phelan Literary Award, a Solas Award in the category of Culture and Ideas, and in 2023 debuted a love letter, which we will be talking about today. It's a phenomenal piece of work. Debuted a love letter that was honored by Small Press Distribution as a bestseller in May and June of that same year. There's so much to talk about. Sometimes when I ask our guests for their bios, and it comes back with like 5 lines, and I'm like, there is so much more there, but that's great. We'll just dig into it. But welcome to the space, Carmen. It's great to see you. For the folks that aren't familiar with you and where you are, talk to us a little bit about where you're hailing from, where you're talking to us from today.
Okay. Wow. Thank you. I feel hugged with words. Thank you so very much for that intro, and from both you and Bob, just the welcome to BBB. Happy to be here. Yeah, in terms of me, just on the day-to-day, I work here at San Jose State University. I'm teaching African American Studies, and a class that I particularly teach semester after semester is AFAM 22, African American Studies and the Humanities. And I got my own take on it, which is really nice because we've been given a little bit of freedom in how we can step into the curriculum. I also have founded, and this was several years ago, a student organization that tries to, aspires to, maybe even emulates you a little bit, platform Black artists in particular, but artists of color more broadly, and to pull the students in on that endeavor so that they get a little bit of work experience and get to rub shoulders with folks like you and with Bob. So there's that. And yeah, I signed myself up for school, and Bob and I were talking about that as I came in on the call. That's a lot. I signed myself up for a lot. I think that was like the thing the straw that tipped the camel, or however the saying goes. But I'm hanging in there. I'm not gonna let it go. It's giving me more empathy to the folks I'm teaching. And it's also kind of like proof of concept that it can be done. Yeah.
Right. Oh man, thank you. There's there's so much to do. Oh, are you hearing an echo, or is it just me?
I'm okay.
Okay. Um, you are you originally from San Jose State, of course? Are you originally from San Jose or the Bay Area?
I got here in let's see, this is like the 70s. Yeah. pretty much early 70s, maybe. Middle school,
Okay.
maybe 6th grade. Yeah, 6th grade, which would be like stepping into middle school.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I've been here for a minute.
San Jose's been home. You've seen it grow and turn
Yeah.
and evolve and matriculate.
Yeah. I'm a military brat, so before that we were down south where there used to be Vandenberg Air Force Base, but since all the bases were closed, that's now kind of like a whole different landscape down there. But yeah, that was my early life. And then when my dad retired, we moved up here. And the only employers, or I should say the only two really big employers in the Valley were Lockheed and IBM,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is what
That drew a lot of folks up here in the 70s.
Yeah, this is what, as I sort of meet more people and dig into sort of the history of San Jose, I see a lot of that kind of migration over to the San Jose area for that and the stories that build around that kind of a migration.
Right.
So your bio, when we talk about your bio, it's filled with accolades, I think, but for those who don't know sort of your journey to where you are, I'd love, and this is probably 2 or 3 part, but I would love to hear what brought you to teaching, to being in this space of being an educator, and then on top of that, what brought you into the sort of the writing space to be in this sort of art form.
Right. Okay, life. That's a short answer. Okay. The long answer is I'm a creative. I always have been. My undergrad or my early life, I could draw. So you could call me a visual artist. And that's a really competitive field. So when I stepped into the workaday world, I was a creative. I was working at Lockheed, actually. I was a graphic artist among many, and the space station was being built. So we were doing a lot of little graphics and whatnot for meetings, etc., and books, volumes and volumes of books. I mean, the whole thing was being pulled together. So there were a lot of schematics and drawing, et cetera. It wasn't creative work necessarily, but as a creative, you find the creativity in whatever you do, right? I was there. I'm gonna sound a little bit like Forrest Gump, so sorry about this.
No, please. This is what this is for. I love these stories.
So yeah, then 1984, the Mac came out. And you probably remember that iconic commercial that was kind of themed off of Big Brother.
Yeah.
So yeah, as the Mac was being introduced to this humongous company, Lockheed, a lot of the folks who were part of that workforce looked like I do now. They had gray hair. They were, the latter part of their life. Yada, yada. I was one of the young person, and, as young people are even today, I was like connected to the technology. So I ended up teaching folks how to use this new tool. And then a whole lot of other stuff blew up, like Microsoft blew up. So then there are all of the Microsoft products. Adobe blew up. This is the beginning of .com in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was well connected, and I just had a way of being able to share the information in a way that was easily accepted, easily understood. So I never really thought of myself as an educator, but I was sharing information. And so that's the early iteration of me sharing information. I would not even I have a little bit of problem calling myself an educator even now, because I feel like I'm more of a catalyst than an educator. So, if we want to drill down on that, you can say that's, the essence of being an educator, right?
Right.
Catalyze more learning. So yeah, I'm stepping back into that space, with that same spirit. But again, just to circle back to the creative part of me, um, that life kind of like, took me in different directions. So I was, part of the generation who started using graphics online and creating images online, et cetera, et cetera. Um, let's see, what else would be a part of that? The two kind of like parallel careers going on at the same time, um, put me in a space where I was writing. So I was writing curriculum
Right.
for the tech classroom.
Okay.
And I would never call myself a writer, but I was having to write as part of this process to catalyze again,
Right.
learning. And graphics were a part of it too, because images, et cetera, as well as words tell the story. To me, they're inextricable.
Right.
Um, so here we are, latter part of my life. How can I remake myself into spaces that are more creative, spaces that better fill my soul?
Right.
So, okay, I've lived a little bit of life. Let me put myself back in school. I got something to write now. In the, creatively, but also just in terms of, the life that I had experienced. And the life that I experienced had to do with family, had to do with, race is part of that. So it comes up in the writing, not explicitly, but it's just part of my existence. So I, was learning as I was going and working through some of that. And so the formal education, putting myself in an MFA program, um, was for me a catalyst, because I there too needed some catalyzing in terms of kind of like pushing where I wanted to go forward with more momentum. So part of that program and having that support of, actually having to write, um, uh, learning the craft itself, working through, um, my understanding and my ideas about, the American project and, social constructs and, et cetera, et cetera. I had to write a thesis, and part of that thesis is a love letter. So that would be a portion of the entire thesis that I wrote. Um, and yeah, you know, uh, another wonderful thing about being in a program, uh, is the people you meet, right? So, um, I met you through that process, actually. Um, Not in the beginning, but first I got picked up by a publisher, and that publisher is local, and then so that introduced me to a whole cadre of folks. Of course, the professors that I had when I was going through the program, they introduced me to folks, and also my publisher. And yeah, you were kind of within that ecosystem of folks who were performing poetry, and Poetry Center San Jose was part of that ecosystem as well. So I got to meet Bob, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, life.
Right. You know, and
Short answer, life. Long
no, and
answer.
it's so funny. I love this because I get on the show sometimes. You have conversations around folks of sort of like I put it as what was your creation story, and it's this light bulb moment, or I was writing since I was, 6, and et cetera, et cetera. But no, I love this story because, I feel like sometimes, and especially, I have a 14-year-old going on 35. I'm super blessed. But, there's so much in schools and in her world that's like, okay, what is it that you want to do? Set this out now because you have to figure it out. And yes, you can change later, but you have to have this foundation. And I get that. I understand that. But at the same time, when you've lived life, you realize how much construction is involved in curating that life. Have dreams, absolutely. Have a direction, have a North Star. But sometimes you have to Lego piece things together. And sometimes I worry that whether it be the education system or whatever, social media, whatever the case may be, everything is so pre-packaged, and ready to plug and play.
Absolutely.
I don't usually have these conversations where, you know, folks get to see that this is created, and which is a big difference, because I'm not saying other folks aren't working, because it takes work to do all of this, but there's a difference to like having to, again, get the Lego pieces. And as you said before, being in a space where this is the first time graphics is coming up in this type of a world, it's the first, these computers are coming up. Like, how do you take these new things? I guess I can equate it to AI now, right? It's sort of
Absolutely.
how are you going to take these new pieces and integrate them into this life that we know? So, I love the Forrest Gump, journey, as you say, taking us
Yeah.
there. I think that's real, and that's again one of the reasons why I wanted you on the show to talk about this, because I know this is a life you've curated. So,
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, not to interrupt you, but I kind of feel like I came in on a cusp, right? We were just moving into digital world, from analog to digital. And again, Silicon Valley just blew up, right? It became a thing where it wasn't before. And now I'm telling my students, yeah, you're kind of like in a similar historical pivot point that you're stepping into. So I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
no, that's exactly what I'm saying. I mean, I don't even know. I mean, we'll talk about that a little bit later in terms of like this AI and this new world that we're living in, and what that means to teachers. But, what is well, before I even get into that, let me ask, you talked about the courses that you're teaching, which is, sort of these African American and humanities course. How did that come about?
Okay, I can say again live because when I started my MFA program, when I came back to school, and put myself in a formal environment, because I really didn't know where to go with the writing. I really didn't know how to step into that creative medium. I'd work with other mediums, but I just didn't know how to step into that one and give it a life, right? I could write in a silo by myself, but how do I make that work? So yeah. You wanted to tie that back to AFAM, African American Studies in the Humanities. What I've tried to do is I've tried to marry a lot of that experience with whatever entry point students who come to me are taking, right? So I get a real mixed bag of folks who are coming to these classes, African American Studies in the Humanities. Some of them are going into STEM, some of them are going into, human services like social work or psychology or, whatever the case might be, right? Justice studies. Some of them are going into art, as in, creative art like fine art or theater, or even, there are a few writers that also pass by me in terms of taking this particular class. And my challenge was, if I only have time with them for one semester, what thing do I think would be a real game changer for them, no matter where they're going, no matter where life takes them, no matter what discipline they're stepping into, right? Or even if they step into it and their life pivots, what thing do I think might have a lasting impact? And so we do a little bit of history, but we drill down um, uh, through that history, examining CRT, critical race theory. I also call it critical whiteness studies, because I have enveloped in the curriculum a podcast. It comes out of Duke. It's called Seeing White. John Biewen is the host, and he brings in Chandra Kumanika, and the two of them examine whiteness. And so that's what we do. That's my take. That's my brief take on how I enter this curriculum. Because I think that no matter who the student is that's going on this little semester-long journey with me, they will get something out of that. They will be more introspective, no matter who they are. They will be more critical about the systems in which we live and about this American project. They will question the institutions, the systems, the structures in which we live. And yeah, I guess, my approach, again, this is me being reticent about calling myself an educator, is a little bit of institutional jailbreaking that we do in the process of, how I engage them in learning. Because the institution will always want to take you a certain way. And they'll always want to box you in, right? But I think the knowledge.
And this is. Can you hear me okay? Because I know my internet went a little unstable for a second.
That's okay. I can hear you.
So
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So I'd love, there's so many things that you said there in terms of the system, breaking down the system. So in essence, this is it's an elective. I'm assuming it's an elective that folks can take, or is it part of the requirement?
It is. It's an elective, so they have a choice. If it fulfills the ethnic studies requirement that Shirley Weber kind of pushed forward. She's now our Secretary of State. Shirley Weber was pushing forward, and the CSU picked it up. Gavin Newsom signed it off as a law that within the CSU system, students will take ethnic studies as a requirement. Now, within that, they have the choice of African American studies, Chicanic studies, Asian studies, and now Indigenous studies here at San Jose State. So yeah. Is it, you asked me, is it elective? Yeah, it's kind of elective, but kind of not.
No, and that's exactly what I was trying to get at. I remember going to school, taking African and religion classes and all of these classes that were quote unquote elective back then in City College in New York, but there wasn't a requirement. Like we had to, I was lucky enough to be a couple blocks away from the Schomburg. So you're just in this space where these things were made to be, and some of the professors, but I was lucky, right? So now coming and saying, okay, across the world and years later, that at least it's being written into some book of regulation to say that ethnic studies are a requirement, I think is a huge step.
I really champion her work that she did. Not just her, there's lots of folks that have been pushing for this. And the fact that now, there's not just talk, but in certain districts, there's actual adoption of AP ethnic studies, like AP African American studies, AP Chicana studies, which is great. And kind of like an adjunct to what we're doing.
And even on the high school level,
as an AP class would be, yeah.
yeah. Even on the high school level, in some of the schools in this particular area, they've added AP African American Studies as part of the high school curriculum.
Good.
Just starting. So that's fantastic. So what is your, you've had this journey. What is your favorite thing about being a teacher or an educator? And I know you don't like it, but I'm calling you an educator. Oh, what you
Okay.
are.
My favorite thing is when students have a light bulb moment.
Mm.
That's just bottom line, my favorite thing. I'm kind of geeky about, just educating myself. So there's that. There's never enough time in the day to do that, to stay abreast of what's happening and to just address my miseducation, as Carnegie Woodson would say, right? So there's that. And yeah, just that light bulb moment. Helping students step into racial literacy. Frances Widens Twine, she kind of like coined that phrase and well, I should say did some writing, did some scholarship around that phrase that kind of brought it into the lexicon of sociologists and educators. But yeah, helping them build some sort of literacy around how to step into conversations like this, and do it with confidence. And that's something that even I'm developing myself, but I feel very happy, very gratified when students leave their time with me be with the ability to talk about or write about something that never came up in conversations before, or would have been a conversation that they would have run away from, right? Because I think you kind of outlined it, or you guys outlined this with your land acknowledgement. You got to be able to see it first. I mean, this is a new thing, right? Land acknowledgement. You got to be able to see the thing first, admit it.
Right,
Before you
exactly.
can even imagine going about doing some sort of reparation. So I was just really stoked by the fact that at the end of your land acknowledgement, you do have a place for folks to act, right? To donate, which is always the missing component of land acknowledgement, which have become the trend, right? The trend. And that's a good step forward, but we need to get to the repair. So you see it, and you got to figure out what you're going to do about that. Okay, now what? And then you can walk into the work of repair. And I think that the curriculum that we follow also challenges students to do that. So I feel good about that. That's what makes me the happiest.
You're actually giving them the tools.
Yeah.
I love that. So, I always think, so this is a two-part question. One part is, around just sort of being an educator and being in that space, right? When you step in a room and you have these, young minds that you're helping to mold. It's one thing if you're teaching mathematics, right? You have to keep up with things, but it's for lack of a better word, it's an academic thing. It's a very tactile thing that you just need to, what's the latest, from a math methodology perspective. When it comes to teaching things like humanities, when it comes to teaching things like African American studies, do you feel like there's a pressure to know all and be all, so that you're giving how do you manage that? Because everything is changing every day, and you're dealing with a subject that evolves. What's acceptable one day is not the other. What we've seen or we didn't know. I mean, God, every day we dig up different things about, like, oh no, this this particular vacation spot, um, that's now buried underwater, used to be an African American. You know what I mean? There's stuff that pop. How do you manage that part of your world?
With grace. With grace. I manage it with grace because I know what I don't know. I know that I don't know. Let's see. Let me say that again for clarity. I know that I don't know. Right.
Right.
And I know that that's not just me, that's everybody. And I could beat myself up about that. Again, this is like in the spirit of, Carter G. Woodson, Miseducation of the Negro. Here we are. We can only try our best to address it, just as I am inviting students to try their best to address things that they see, things that we see, and uh, not just feel it's sufficient to jump on a trend, and like and subscribe and you know uh, give something lip service or performative outrage. That you got to get past that and really do some self-reflection in terms of, okay, yeah, that really bothers me, but what am I doing about it? Right. So I think a lot of folks are just kind of naturally wired that way. They they learn, they have an activist spirit. The rest of us, kind of have to mm, be called to task in the nicest way possible, but just kind of like reminded of the work, right? And so historically, yeah, we go through some of the folks who have done the work, but history is a living thing. So it's like in real time, who is doing the work? And are you a part of that? Or are you, just contributing to the harm, right?
Mhm.
And so that's, I think, part of the learning too is how do we contribute to the harm by not knowing, by ignorance, through ignorance, through not knowing. Um, and then once you know better, how do we do better, right? So there's a lot of that that's going on. And again, I think that circles back to the light bulb moments, which give me great joy when students realize whatever that thing might be, whether it's, understanding their privilege or understanding democracy is not a spectator sport, or understanding that, um, uh, yeah, just the amount of work and how, I guess what I want to say is understanding their agency.
Okay.
When they get it in their heads that, yeah, you know what, I got a lot of agency with regard to this. I'm moving mountains. I might not see it in the moment, but yeah, my voice in concert with a lot of other voices are moving mountains. So I'll just give an example of this. Last semester, students were camped out underneath the statues at San Jose State University.
Right.
And so were a lot of students in other universities across the nation. We heard it on the news, et cetera, et cetera. There was some contention around them being there, and yet they were allowed to be there. And yet nothing happened to move them completely off of that space in a violent way as it did on other campuses, right?
Right.
and it kind of played out last semester, and then the semester came to an end. And yet the same things that students were very passionate about last semester, the things that put them on that in that encampment underneath the statues are still ongoing and haven't been addressed. And yet the CSU has pushed back on how students can demonstrate their frustrations, how have kind of defined what their activism should look like, in other words. So that's the mechanism that's constantly at work. We basically, as a class, we can see that happening in real time and kind of evaluate on a micro level, like within our university itself, how that plays out, and then in concentric circles moving outward, how this is playing out, not just regarding frustration over any movement in a positive direction for freeing Palestine, but you know, when it comes to a whole lot of other issues too that are very much on the minds of students and need to be addressed. Yeah.
And being in that mechanism and being able to see what's going on, and then I guess building that wherewithal to say, okay, well, now within that mechanism, how do you know, I feel like it's like a virus and it gets in the system, right? You then,
Yeah.
you know, grow out and at least acknowledge and I guess not using it as a virus, because the virus goes in and then kills, right? But you know, it's kind of like, but being inside of it, I can imagine being in the midst of this, in that system, and then coming back the next year, as you said, and seeing some of the same mechanisms and even more now being in place to say, okay, this is, you know, this is the blueprint of what you can do. Now you're in that space. How do you figure out, you know, what's the next plan, you know? Because when you're outside of the space, you could always walk away, right? You could always
Exactly. Yeah. So for them to see that their voice and their activism had an impact, even if the impact was to kind of tamp them down, right? It just shows how powerful what they were doing was.
Yes.
Right. And that's just on one campus. Imagine the other campuses, you know, realizing the strength of their voices and acts as well, right? So yeah, I mean, it's a push me, pull you type of dynamic. But within that, I think that students can see that, not just students, but we can see that we come into our power by using our voice.
Yeah, I love that. We're definitely gonna get to your wonderful book. I got a couple questions for you, because just the topic, of course, and it's something that I dig into, but the topic itself has so many different tunnels that you can, you know, that you can go through. But you know, what do you say to the person that would say, well, why do we need these types of, you know, why do we need to identify these pockets of ethnicity and then teach around it? We're all human beings.
Yeah. So, so you, I guess, are you kind of asking like, what's the foundation or the life that we give to ethnic studies or any kind of conversation about race, perhaps,
yeah,
ethnicity and culture.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm trying to get at that, but it's not even so granular. I mean, and you've probably seen this before, but I've had conversations, you know, with folks where anytime you add this thing in front of it, African American studies, Chicano studies, something studies, there's always sort of this, well, if we're all, you know, if we're all purporting to be humans, why do we need to divvy that up? I mean, of course, the other side of that is, you know, because I'm not going to answer the question, but
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
let you
I
in
got
your,
you.
it's just what I've come up, and I can imagine being in that space. Either you've been questioned directly, or folks in, looking at that syllabus and saying like, well, why do I have to do, what's with this African
Right.
humanities class,
Which is, I think, why it exists as a requirement in the CSU now, because some folks were able to make that argument. And other folks listened, right? So it got signed off. So just inherent within that is the justification, or the calling to justify oneself, and that inherent in that, it's just problematic to have to justify your existence. And yet here we are, and we have to do it constantly. And that becomes part of the discourse. Luckily we can have it in the university, and perhaps you can have it in an AP class at the high school level. But the problem, I believe, that persists is that folks are loath to have it at a national level. So perhaps this is a way of foundationally building us up to the reckoning that never has happened on a larger scale. Why? Because I think people with open minds, and that often is young folk, but not exclusively, right? But people with open minds. And I circle back to that thing about you got to be able to see the thing first, right? So people with open minds are acknowledging that they see that societally we have problems, and those problems are very much informed by race or ethnicity or, culture, right? And I think young folks are open to being able to see that too, because it's right there in front of them as well. And I think 2020 kind of stepped a lot of people who are having a hard time seeing this, it stepped them into perhaps, greater 2020 vision, right? Maybe
Right.
it created some lens for them that they previously did not have, right? So I think that this is, some movement forward, to eventually get us to a point where a lot of folks can see what's going on right there in front of their face. Am I really hopeful about this? Nah, based on what I see. I'm not really hopeful about it, but I feel good doing the work. And I'm sure a lot of folks who can see what's going on in front of their faces, and they see folks, politically playing in their faces, I'm sure they feel good when they can, do the work and, share the good news and all that good stuff. Um, but yeah, I think, again, in terms of a process where we need to get to as an American project, and what we've been talking about on this call, is see it, understand it, and be able to deconstruct it. Um, do some self-evaluation in terms of what's your responsibility, and then do something about that, right? Where do you go? Like, what's next? Where do we go from here? And within that, where do we go from here is repair. So again, I think embedded in your question is the folks that are doing the pushback as to perhaps, why does ethnic studies exist? why do we need Black studies? Why do we need to talk about race? Why do you keep bringing this up? Yeah, I think kind of inherent in that is I don't want to see, I don't see, or I don't want to see, right?
Yeah, yeah. But you're still right, because you're admitting that the question exists in the first place.
Yeah. So there are a lot of folks doing that work. I think here we are talking about beautiful Black books. There are folks who are not Black that are doing the work. Like I'm thinking about what's the sister's name? Robin. Hang on for a second. Give me a second. Yeah, Robin DiAngelo. Her name slipped me for a sec. Yeah. And she takes a lot of heat, but I think that she's talking to an audience that will listen to her or will listen differently because of her positionality. So the work needs to be done by a lot of folk. And, you know, I'm kind of encouraged when I see folks picking up the mantle and saying, you know what, I can speak to this community, my community. And you can define who my is, right? And I see it, I get it. I'll be committed to doing this work. And I think with that kind of model, if we have any hope of getting there, again, I'm not that really optimistic, but if we have any hope of getting there, it will be because folks who are Black are doing the work, right? And perhaps encouraging accountability from folks who are not Black. But it will be the folks who are not Black talking to their own communities and doing that work that will kind of like take us to another juncture and moving closer and closer toward repair, some sort of repair. Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna jump into it, but you it's funny how I always talk about how the universe works. I just yesterday listened to there's an interview that Dr. Henrik Clark did
Yeah.
some time ago. And one of the things that he mentioned in it that is so obvious but not obvious, and talking to like non-Black folks that are having this conversation, and not that they were doing this directly, but he said, you know, the 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 sort of start, the impetus of a lot of these sort of Black scholars writing about the African American experience, writing about J.A. Rogers and the psychology and and all the psychology and such about the Black African experience were off of the heels of a lot of non-Black professors and writing about Egyptology and writing about what they, of course it was a Eurocentric view of things, but what he said was something very simple. He said, typical Black person has the time and the resources and the money to sit there and spend 6 years writing 6 volumes about Egyptology, or this volume's about this and blah, blah, blah. So it wasn't until that work came out and it was put in front that then other folks were able to then layer on top of this and say, wait a minute, if this is the case, there was history before slavery, clearly. So let's dig into this, So for me, it was just this great parallel of even as people of color sort of do this work, the importance of in parallel people of non-color doing, in that situation, it wasn't the same kind of work, but doing something that then opens up like you said, a space for folks who aren't living that life to evaluate things going on. Yeah,
that's well put. Yeah,
it was an aha moment for me because I never thought about that. You again look at these authors And nowadays they're spending, their entire lives digging into this stuff. But back then, you couldn't survive and do that at the same time, right? So anyway, well, look, this takes us into the book. Tango Ice Martin described your love letters, a love letter, as a. Let me see if I can do this. I have the kids do it. There we go. As a confrontation with humanity and the predatory nature of the medical system. We're going to get into reading a bit of it. But can you tell us, just in your terms, how the book sort of grapples with race and class disparities, sort of in healthcare, from what you experienced?
Absolutely. I loved what you wrote too. Thank you. You open up the book. Carmen's exquisite memoriam moves between the harshest of loss and ways in which our bodies accept its inevitability. True. It snapshots a personal moment with such beautiful transcendence that it draws in all the senses and will serve as, lastly, a guide to anyone else who has to later turn the pages of their own scrapbooks. I am forever changed. Thank you for that.
No, I meant,
You wrote that. You wrote that, and it's like, yeah, you got to what I'm trying to get to, which is, we all are headed that way. We're not growing younger. All of us are growing older. Yeah. So to answer your question now, what was it? What's in a snapshot? What am I talking about?
Yeah,
How am I stepping into this?
Race and class disparities sort of in the healthcare system.
Can I just step back a minute and just tell you how I got to the book first? Because the other is kind of like, it just always is. Race is always going to be imbued in everything, right? But how did I get here? I had in my family, my mother and her two sisters. They're all in their 80s, by the way, when I step into this. One of them has Alzheimer's. One of them was taking care of one with Alzheimer's. And then my mother, she had her own care needs as well. And so I got introduced to a system that I didn't know about, because I haven't really, just because the way our family is situated, and a lot of them are back in St. Louis, Missouri. And, my mother, and I don't have any siblings, we're here in California. I wasn't brought up around a lot of elderly. I wasn't brought up around our elders. So I didn't really know a lot about caring for elders. And I was thrown into a situation where I had to all of a sudden do that. And so I did not know how I would encounter race in that, I guess, just life situation, right? And so when I wrote the book, I took from, I believe it was Toni Morrison that said this, and I can't quote her, so I'm paraphrasing in kind of a feeble way, but that the normative when you pick up a book is that the characters are white, that the place and the setting is situated in white spaces, and if you are to introduce a character of color, then that's when the author or usually kind of paints that character as such, right? Kind of in a break with the normative, so to speak. And she was saying that in her writing, her normative is spaces in which Black people inhabit, right? Her characters are Black families. The people who interact with those characters would perhaps be assumed to be other Black characters. And if not, those are the characters that she fleshes out, right? Right. So she's fleshing out the white characters. She's fleshing out perhaps the other people of color that her characters, that her normative would encounter. And so I stepped into the writing with that in mind. And perhaps not explicitly do I flesh out the characters who are not Black, not part of my family makeup. I don't explicitly do it, but it comes up in small ways. It might be through their actions that it's implied. And again, I can circle back to Toni Morrison as inspiration when she wrote Recitative, that little short story, that one little short story that she wrote, where she doesn't really explicitly name the race of either of her protagonists, but she kind of plays with tropes, and the reader is put in a position where, you know, their biases flesh out the characters. Yeah. So I guess, you know, I'm kind of like doing a roundabout way of addressing the thing that you asked me, and how race shows up. It doesn't, but it does.
You know what? And what is so amazing about what you just said and what you talked about, especially with the Toni Morrison piece, there is, as I read the question back to myself, it's almost a rhetorical question, right? Because I don't have a choice, right? And I don't know if that's because it's a person of color thing or what, but I don't have that choice. Anything that I touch is going to be influenced by my race. I don't have
absolutely.
You know, and so the question in of itself is rhetorical, because of course it touches, of course it deals with it, of course it grapples with it, and it's going to grapple with everyone differently based off of their experience. See, look at this. You just gave me my light bulb moment.
Okay, good. Yeah, good.
Yeah. You know.
So you might step into this book and you might start reading it. You might not, you know, picture a Black family or you know, my Black experience. You might not, but you know, that's me. I'm not writing to explain that to the reader. I'm telling my story, and my story is a Black story, right? And that can look all kinds of ways. Exactly. Because we are not a monolith.
No, absolutely. You know, it's so we've been put in this space of being prescriptive with so many things, you know, and having to categorize, right? That
exactly. We should not have to explain ourselves or our experience. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, look, there's so many questions, but I want to give folks time to hear you read from this beautiful book that I had the pleasure of first reading it when I was on a plane. So I was focused. This was my world in this plane, and I was so blown away. But I want to give you some time to read from it, and then we'll have a couple of questions. I have for you afterwards. But the floor is yours.
It's a little bitty thing. It's a chapbook. But again, it steps readers into a part of my life where I was grappling with a lot of stuff. I was grappling with mortality. I was grappling with, you know, generational wealth. I was grappling with institutions like healthcare. So I start out this book with actually the title itself of the section being The End. After being groomed by a nursing home attendant, she drew in all four limbs and lay there rigid like a pill bug protecting its middle. Her dark pupils bore into me as if some obdurate part of her could excavate my thoughts. I told myself, you're letting her in your head. You're imagining improbabilities from a mind lost in an interminable void and inaccessible beyond contortions. The hospice nurses seemed to float around her with a solemnity of spirits who could intuit from her labored breath something other than the end, simply struggling to begin. I watched them hover and speak sotto voce about things they thought she might want if she were able to voice her desire for anything, if her tongue had not been tied by the disease. I had imagined, or perhaps really hoped, the irony of Alzheimer's had wiped away this moment, as it had wiped away all the things that once weighed upon her, the marriages that long ago dissolved like the antacids she had taken to stomach them, a decade that waxed in 82 with the news her firstborn had acquired the immunodeficiency and waned with his burial and news her secondborn's fate would be the same. I had really hoped she had forgotten how their skin bruised like ripened plums until receding, drawing close to their bones as would dried fruit around its pit. I'd hoped she'd forgotten the tiny rock-hard thing of the same size, taking root in her bosom and feeding where her sons once grew fat. I'd hoped she'd forgotten sitting in oncology, sipping poison cocktails, lamenting her losses and the crown of tightly wound silver curls that sloughed off her head. I'd hoped these terrible marked memories were wiped away with all the thoughts she might have otherwise let roam round in her head, a loved one's disposition at any given time, an unexpected kindness, an embarrassment, a foible, a future vanquished the day she was diagnosed. So that's just what takes us into the story. Let's see. I talk a little bit about, who she was as a person. And then I encounter the system. So I'll jump in where I encounter the system. And I call this one the mixed blessing. Amberwood Gardens was not the first nursing home I'd visited, but it was the last. And although this is something that I like to think the friendly staff and the smell of its shampooed carpet influenced, it wasn't, at least not to the same extent of my sheer exhaustion. I was simply tired, and as such, surrendered, signing my aunt's pension away in what seemed like an act of desperation. Sometime shortly after I'd secured my aunt's room and weathered the transition, I started to question the system into which I'd placed her, partly based on the facility's high costs. These had me seeing red, and partly because I felt I was without options. Elder care had a monopoly on aging in a world where everybody grows old. I'd like to think if my aunt had been able, she would have assured me, saying, "The Lord led you here in an emergency, so count your blessings and get on with it." Amberwood Gardens was perhaps a blessing, but it felt more like a dispensation that would eventually cost our family its generational wealth. The Amberwood facility was in San Jose. It was off a major highway, 1 block west of a well-worn avenue, straddled by suburbia and a few gentrified malls. And it was thankfully not far from home. It was staffed with people I truly believed would make my aunt's last years better than they might have been were she with me. The cleanliness of the Amberwood lounges and corridors were unrivaled by peer homes in the area. But nevertheless, it was a nursing home, a last resort. I was pinch hitting on my way to finding a more sustainable long-term care solution. I tried to manage late nights sitting up with my aunt and early mornings when I had to muster the strength to get through another day. Both late and early situations were providing at-home the at-home effort that simply could not last. So I devoted my every thankful moment, every thankful pause in my day to desperate internet searches, and these led me to adult daycare facilities. I learned to appreciate the fact that daycare was like childcare and that staff engaged attendees apropos to their level of ability. But while most of the attendees were high functioning, my aunt was not. In the beginning, I figured this wouldn't be much of a problem. After all, none of the attendees had come to daycare to engage in deep conversation or find a chess partner. I signed the enrollment form, which basically read, "Will provide a snack and ensure attendees are safe and will occasionally make eye contact with attendees and smile," although neither of these was actually in writing. And wanting to see daycare as a solution, I chose to overlook the fine print. Will assist attendees with toileting, but not with soiled clothing or pull-ups. And of course, everything soils over time. The day I decided to dress her in a pair of nice wool slacks, the lightweight sweater placketed with grosgrain, they called to apologize about their blowout. I think the woman on the phone was trying to be discreet, saying, "Your aunt had a little accident." And a statement that seriously undercut the severity of what had happened. In fact, she had put it so delicately, I was convinced I simply had to appear with a change of clothes, clean things up, and be on my way. However, this was not the case. The quote unquote accident had traveled down my aunt's pant leg and into her shoe. It was 2014, and the median cost of adult daycare was $77 an hour. Too exorbitant for a snack, safe surroundings, and smiles from one or two attendants with little else. The cost of care and the advanced stage of the disease made daycare and its counterpart, residential care, terribly inaccessible long term. Neither daycare nor residential care accepted Medi-Cal, the California state program that's meant to supplement the cost of care for those of us who can barely afford it. But Amberwood happened to be a nursing home that accepted Medi-Cal. California's annual median cost for a nursing home at the time was about $125,000. This cost necessitated Medi-Cal then as it necessitates it now. In fact, Medi-Cal would better serve patients if it were to become a perennially accessible source of funding. Everything my aunt had, pension, Social Security, and meager savings were paid to the home. Medi-Cal would make up the difference, and the state would recoup its disbursements with a lien. In the case of my aunt, a lien was placed on her non-existent estate, meaning the state of California would seize every asset, from the smallest of things, like a credit card rebate, to largest, like insurance proceeds. The nursing homes have the capacity to leverage a system of guaranteed payment, guaranteed patience, and the guarantee that families with little or no resources will sign up for a moment's rest. The system seems unfair, especially if you believe nursing home care to be an extension of healthcare and healthcare to be a human right. So those are two little sections out of the book. I don't know if you want me to keep going.
Yeah, if there's
Or-
something else you want to share,
Yeah. Okay.
you have about 5 minutes or so, but
Okay. Let me jump to the end then. The book goes on, and because my aunt was at the end, there was not really a lot to say about physically her movement. She like I unpacked earlier in the reading, she wasn't vocal at that point. So I was looking at a lot of the residents around her and interfacing with them as we were waiting for her end. And so the book kind of walks us through their humanity and the humanity of the caregivers, the CNAs. These are folks that don't make a lot of money, and that's still a contentious political point to this day. And it was basically me seeing them, recognizing them, and kind of critiquing the system. But I'll jump to the end because this kind of summarizes that. I hoped to summarize it in the end. I could probably fit in two things. Embracing penitence, and this is really me giving myself grace, and then in memoriam, which is really a short part of that that I was talking about at the very end of the chapbook. So embracing penitence, this is again me giving myself grace. Another shift of nurses had come to work in the Alzheimer's unit. We greeted one another and made small talk. Haven't seen Gretchen in a while. That was one of the characters. Haven't seen Gretchen in a while, I said casually to one of them. The one paused and ruefully shook her head, nursing home shorthand or wordless communication that spoke volumes. Bless her. It hadn't seemed that long since my last tete-a-tete with Gretchen, somehow preoccupied with my own world and my auntie's hospice. I had forgotten this journey was eminently finite, eminently finite. And someone's departure can seem abrupt if you miss as little as a day, a week, or a month. Time lapsed before I could muster the strength to pay the place another visit. Lexi was there when I returned. I encountered her scooting down the corridor with the same scowl she had the day we first met. She didn't remember me, of course, but I asked how she and her critters were, getting along all the same. Well, her jaw slack, her eyes a bit watery, as if I'd opened her book of life. You know my yellow dog, my horse? What's your dog's name again? I asked, thinking this would perk her up like so many months before. But she dribbled a little. She dribbled about her horse, stuttered, and grappled for words that weren't there. Sometime between that moment and our last, Alzheimer's had stolen her speech. But I listened nevertheless, injecting randoms like, you don't say, and imagine that. Maybe she was satisfied. I couldn't be sure. As once again, she dug her heels in the carpet and rolled away. Good talking with you, Lexi. It had grown harder to get a spoon into my aunt's mouth, and it had been impossible to brush her teeth long before that. In fact, her teeth, what was left of them, were clenched shut, no doubt symptom of the disease, or perhaps she was by some ungodly force lucid behind those wild and vacant eyes, exerting tension in her jaw intentionally with the hope of telling someone she was simply done. Nature's way of converging with her last attempt to exercise some agency. When my aunt lost her second son to AIDS, she signed an advance directive and the DNR, do not resuscitate. I reviewed the letter with a hospice chaplain. The alternative to leaving her unmolested was a feeding tube. I suppose she would have wanted her DNR to apply to feeding now. And I suppose I had read a little bit of that intent in her clenched teeth. And I shuddered to think that this was my final encounter with the specter of the stylish woman she once was, a woman who made decisions for her children, her household, and herself. Sarah was one of the caregivers in the book. Sarah pulled me aside. Listen, Mija, she said, looking quite earnest. They don't like me using a spoon to open your aunt's mouth. Sarah let me know she had tried her best, feeding my aunt as long as she could. I could hear defeat in her voice. Anything more would have constituted forced feeding. Sarah had gotten my back in many ways I could never quantify. But for what it was worth, I managed to save up a little of my thanks and bundle it in an envelope for her to do with as she pleased. Thanks, Sarah. This is for you. It happened to be that Sarah was indeed my intercessor, forgiving me when I went to AOL, absent without leave. It's okay. We all get busy, picking up conversations as if months hadn't passed. Come, see what you did today. And giving me, with a smile, an absolution after Miss Holiday's bienvenido. So now my aunt is curled up in her bed. Her eyes are open. They look through me, hopefully seeing something beautiful on the other side, something other than my shortcomings. Hospice calls with status updates every other day now. We're waiting. I don't know if I can get through the last part.
Oh, this
The
is
back or
okay.
the end of this. Yeah.
I think this is a great place to transition into some of the questions. I do have to say though, I mean, well, first of all, thank you for not just the book. Thank you for sharing yourself and for sharing your family with us. I think, as someone as I get more mature in my age, and some of these things become a lot more prevalent in my life, whether it be directly or with, folks that I know. There's so much of what you've put in this work that I feel like, we talked about elective classes in school. Like, I think this book should be taught, in adult classes, and people should be required to read it. And for many reasons. One is, and I don't know how you walked out of it not just being the angriest person in existence, but for just on the healthcare system in this country, and being and what it takes, and what's involved. I think it's a necessity for folks to realize what it really looks like, and not be surprised, right? I think so. This is a warning. On one side, the other side of it is just such and I think it was who was it? Yes, it was Vandela Vida, who said,
Oh, yes.
who said what a tribute this this work is to your aunt. I think that's an incredible piece that folks need to read this to understand the level of empathy that's required. And the more I know you, is the more I realize how much of that is just in who you are as an individual. But to be able to then replicate that on page. Anyway, look, I could sit here and sing your accolades, which I will do continuously.
I appreciate it.
But I do, so in writing this, let's go back to this. What does your family think of your writing, and today? What do they think of it?
My family doesn't really read my writing.
I hear that from everyone. That is so funny. Everybody has the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for taking me out of my, every time I read through this, I don't think I can get through it without tearing up, because it was a difficult time, and systemically nothing's been addressed, right?
Yeah, right.
So other folks are in the situation. I got my button here. Vote. Because I do think it's going to take some political will that we simply don't have, right? Just like you were talking earlier about the conversations that must be had, and stepping folks into conversations about race, like, why do we have ethnic studies? Why does it exist? Why are we still talking about this stuff? Why, get over it, that happened historically. We're moving forward. Things are better now. Yeah, in some respects, some things are better, but in many respects, we got a lot of work to do. And healthcare is another big problem. For me personally, it's kind of like where I plant my flag in terms of, activism and just rage on my part, right? And art is such a wonderful vehicle for expressing that, but also deconstructing it, right? Because it's not healthy to live in that space, rage or anger or regret or sadness or um you know the knowledge that we still live in a racist society. It's not good. It's not good for your health to sit in that constantly. So art, I think, is the vehicle that we all use to kind of express and deconstruct, and you know not just find health through expression, but find health through what I want to say, just calling other folks to action, right? Like using it as a call to action for fellow human beings who have either experienced the same, might experience the same in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, it's it's a it's a beautiful it's a beautiful testament, and there's so much unpacking that needs to be done. When you touched on, I can see multiple chapters. You touched on generational wealth and how that is just buried away now because it's all being sent elsewhere. But if you know what, let me ask you, if this book was an actor or a singer, who would it be?
Man, that's a good question.
It could be living or living anymore. It's
Yeah.
just
So, my quick go-to, and I'm trying to avoid my quick go-to because I've mentioned her before, Toni Morrison. I I love, you know, excuse me, I can step into her literature just by reading it off the page, but to hear her, and that's a gift that she left us with, to hear her read her own stuff is, transformative. Her voice, her inflection, um, yeah, all the feels were in her voice. All the culture was in her voice. um, just the familiarity of the Black experience, at least according to the way I have lived it, was in her voice, right?
Yeah.
Like she sounded like so many of the women who would sit around the kitchen table, right? So
Yeah. I hear
yeah.
if for me, if when I read it, if the book was it would be Billie Holiday. It would be Billie Holiday for me.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just the tonality and the beauty, but then the grit sort of behind it.
Yeah.
What when you were writing this, what would you say? Is there anything that what most surprised you that you learned about yourself in writing this book?
I got a lot of shit to work through.
Like that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I got a lot.
I love it.
Yeah, and the book did not do enough of it. but I got to work through some of it. I hear my dad in the book, ironically, because, you know, if I ever learned a vocabulary word with more than 3 or 4 syllables, it was from him. I mean, he was educated, but he was educated. Okay, so what do I mean by that? You know, Black folks who are very intelligent and wise beyond any measure of wisdom, and yet none of that has to come from the institution.
Right.
He was one of those folks, and he just talked with words that were multisyllabic, and kind of made me love vocabulary and language. Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
It's the same experience with my dad as well. I have 2 more sections for you before we go. The second to last section, I call it my who dat section. And my who dat section is really, if you had to be with 3 people, past or present, in an elevator, you get stuck in an elevator with them for 3 hours, who would be the 3 people that you would use in the elevator?
Stuck on an elevator. Okay, I'm an introvert, so I would not want to be stuck on an elevator.
You need I'm not claustrophobic.
Yeah, because I get my energy by being by myself for a minute. But I love folks. Not to say that I don't love folks, but it's kind of like, okay, let's see, 3 folks. It'd be great if my dad could come back for a minute.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm stuck on this elevator with you, Zoom. I really appreciate that, and I'm enjoying it. And I've always wanted to have that moment with you.
That's great.
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that we're here. When we've done events together before, I never really got to have a conversation with you, and we've done that. So yeah, that's another person. Yeah. Yeah.
Toni Morrison. I knew it.
Oh, well, yeah. You know, I didn't want to state the obvious. I'm trying to be creative here. Sorry, but yeah.
No, top of mind. You know, I asked this question once, and someone said, "Oh, I don't remember the 2 people, but it were 2 people with very, like, the furthest away from philosophies as possible." And they said they would want them in the room just so they could sit down and see the debate, you know. So it's anything, and at the moment, you know, what comes to mind.
Yeah, there's so many folks. I mean, you know, I was reading some of Malcolm X the other day too. And I was like, that'd be interesting. That brother could come back and, you know, kind of like unpack stuff, juxtaposed to what we're still going through.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's still happening. Yep, that's still happening. Yep, still here.
Blow your mind, brother. It's like, okay, well, your words are timeless.
Exactly. Okay, and the last part here, I call it the it's just a quick fire round, and if you've seen the show before, you've seen this piece, but it's really just me saying, I'll give you a word, and you say the first thing that comes to your mind. It doesn't have to be anything other than just what's in your mind at in the moment. All right, so I
love it when witty people do this, you know, people who are very witty. I love it when they do this because they always come up with really creative stuff. But yeah, go ahead. I'll do my best. Uh-oh, it's frozen just a little bit. The audio is frozen just a little.
And that's the thing. It's like it can.
Hang on. Okay, now you're back. Here you go. Here we go.
Yeah, all right. So whenever my audio stops, it always stops right at this moment. At this.
Oh shoot.
It's crazy. Okay, so let's try and get through this. Okay, first thing that comes to your first word or two or three words that come to your mind when I say poetry.
Poetry, Tshaka Campbell. Wow.
All right.
Beautiful Black books. Yes. All right.
Next one is mother.
Mother. I'm thinking about myself, honestly. But there have been such wonderful mother figures in my life. My aunts would be those folks. My own mother, I have a tortured relationship with her. But yeah, other folks have kind of like stepped into that void. And then somebody, maybe it's my therapist, told me, you see, you got to be your own best mother, right? And I find myself doing that
Wonderful.
sometimes. Yeah.
As we need to. Next word is language.
Language is a living thing. So what comes to mind? Yeah, just language is a living thing. I mentioned my dad just a couple minutes ago. Um, yeah, it's iterative. We are part of it. We are part of changing it. We're part of changing language. Um, and that is the way it should be. Yeah. It should not be dictated, it should not be colonized. It should, live and breathe as it is meant to.
San Jose State University.
San Jose State University, this is going to be, yeah, this is kind of like the last chapter for me.
Okay, I love that. I love that.
Yeah, I'm stepping
right?
into my retirement career here. I'm doing my last bit of learning here, right? And of course, is I might just drop dead here. That'll
Look,
be okay. I mean, that's a good way to go, if you ask me.
yeah, well, I mean,
Right?
like I said, it's all association. This is that what this exercise is about. It's all association. My next word is lineage.
Lineage. We all have got it. We all have it. Um, Mine happens to be Southern and Black.
Mm,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah. Woman. That's my next word.
It's a construct, right? Another human
Uh,
being. Yeah.
Black woman.
Black woman. So these are my intersections. Right. Yeah. Right.
All right.
They inform my existence, not necessarily by me, but by the soup that we swim in. Just like race, right? Oh, that is race, Black woman, right? Black woman. Okay, so yeah, race, gender, all the constructs, all
all,
all the constructs are up in there. Yeah. So yeah.
Next word is religion.
Religion, yeah, I would say the same about that as well, because that would be another intersection for me. And it's constructed as well. And it when you say religion, I think structures, formal structures, institutions. Because you didn't say spirituality.
No, absolutely.
So so that's why I'm kind of like, yeah, just another construct. Yeah, it's
we're
there.
on the same we're on the same page.
Yeah.
Same page, yeah.
Yeah.
Laughter.
There's some good stuff to say about it, some negative stuff to say about it, right? Yeah. As a formal thing. I'm sorry, what was the next one?
Laughter.
Laughter, gotta have it. We started our call out with this. We started our Zoom call out with this. Bob, you stepped right in. You heard us laughing. We kept it up. And yeah, even after, reading my read and being taken back to some of the stuff that I've gone through, some of the stuff that where I plant my flag, and turning on the waterworks. You bring me right back to laughter. So thank you as a gift.
Yeah. The next word is Palestine.
Palestine. Yeah. We gotta do better.
Yep.
We gotta do better as humanity. Hurt people hurt people.
Yes.
And we gotta figure out how to stop that. Hurt people. And just creating more stuff. It's that's we can do a whole
Absolutely.
episode on just that. But it is just another iteration of what and I hate to say we, because I don't want to be a part of this, but again, we all are, but the things that we don't want to fix, that we don't have the fortitude, socially, politically, etc., to fix or repair.
I got two more for you. The second to last is wife.
Wife, that would be part of a what do you call it? A legal arrangement.
I was wondering which word you were going to
Okay.
come from. I love it.
Couldn't think of the word for a minute there. Yeah. Me and my husband, yeah, we're friends. I hate to use those words that the legal system places on us: wife, husband, spouse. Yeah, that's my friend.
I love it. That's why I choose these words.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Yeah. It's a very institutional word, right?
Right, exactly. And the last word I have for you is book.
Book. Protect them. Create them. Protect, create, preserve, all that, right? Yeah. They will take many forms as we move forward and the technology changes, but yeah, no matter what form they're in, protect, preserve, keep, archive, the whole thing you said. Schomburg, that was the guy, right?
Yeah, honor.
Yeah. Honor. Yeah.
Well, look, Carmen, it has been an absolute pleasure. I'm honored to be able to sit, to be in this world with you, but also just to even be lucky enough to sit in this space and for us to discuss and for me to share a bit of you and share a bit of what I see in our interactions out with the rest of the world. I think is amazing. This ditty here, there it is, a love letter. I urge everyone in our audience, at some point, this should be required reading. There are so many edges to life that this peaks over, stands on the edge of and peaks over, that I think we all need to, I hate to use the word grapple, because it's not really, it's probably grapple is going to come out of it. But I feel as though this is something that everyone needs to experience, because there are so many levels to this work. I wish we had more time, because what I see so much of in this conversation and in this work, a love letter, is this grace, this word grace, and it's come up a couple of times, and I think it's such an important word. I was trying to explain it to my daughter the other day, and I was just like, oh, you just need to give yourself grace. And she understood it, but I didn't know if she understood it, which made me then come back to what does that actually mean? giving yourself grace or giving a thing grace. Again, that's a whole nother beautiful Black books we can we can dig into.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But that being said, I think, everyone should take a look at this book, because it is an exercise in grace, not only the way in which you manage the situation with your aunt, but the grace you took with some of the other folks that were in the facility as well, and just the story itself. Again, like I said,
Thanks. I appreciate that, and the grace I had to give myself too. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much for that.
No, it's incredible, and like I said, I was lucky enough to take this book where, and again, reading it on a plane. I was on my way to England, so it was a 10-hour trip. So to totally get engrossed in this, I was taken away, and it's beautifully put. It's so eloquent. It's so even in its ugly spaces, it's beautiful. And so it's just such a caring piece of work. And it's not, guys, it's not War and Peace, right? So
it's a little thing.
It's like those Roger candies. It's like you bite it and the chocolate's delicious, and then there's what is it, a macadamia nut or an almond or something inside of it, right? So it's like, take all of that. You will you'll be better for it. Thank you, Carmen, for being with us. Thank you for what you do on a day-to-day basis with our youth, and opening up their brains. I used to, when my daughter was going to school, I would make this sound and say, "Okay, you ready for school?" And she's like, "Yeah," and I would make this sound, and it would be like, and it would go, and that was like literally her opening up her head to take all the stuff in. So, thank you for opening up these heads to be able to take some of this stuff in and figure out how to juggle it together and use it in their steps going forward. So there's so much to be thankful for you. I'm so glad you are in this world, you exist, and that you gave me some time. We need to do more of this.
Appreciate that. You have all the words. You're wonderful with the words. I appreciate that. I feel, again, the words, the big hug. I appreciate that. I needed that. Yeah, I feel edified. And I, again, likewise, really appreciate holding this space with you. And Bob back there, I see him. So thanks.
Again, I appreciate it.
Appreciate the space that you've made. Appreciate the platform that you've created for this. Wow, that's the work. That's activism.
Yeah. Thank you for that. We all question that every so often, like, what am I